Hello and welcome to the channel again. This is Sam, still trying to spin to win on Swift. Well, welcome to another club ladder race tonight. And this one I think should be pretty interesting since, at least on paper, the two teams look pretty even.
Are you kidding me right now?
No, really. It should be, at least on paper, a pretty close one. And today we're facing the TT1 Sweet Peas team. So let's have a quick look at the team comparison. This will be a 4 versus 4 race. And for once, we actually have a better ZRS score and Velo score than the opposition. However, when we look at the power numbers, the teams are much more closely matched. On a watts per kilo basis, we have a slight edge on longer efforts, but the Sweet Peas have a much stronger sprint than us. In fact, looking a bit closer at their team, they're really made up of two parts, if you will. Adam and Sam are really strong sprinters, but their longer effort power is not as good, whereas Örjan and Rickard are the opposite. Really strong, longer efforts, diesel type engines, but their sprint numbers are not as good as Adam and Sam's. That should make coming up with a team strategy to beat them pretty interesting, to say the least. So, they seem to have two very strong sprinters and two strong diesel type riders, whereas our team is a bit more evenly matched across the board, I think. So, should be an interesting matchup on what I think is a really good club ladder course, because we're going to do this Scotland Smash course today. It's relatively short as far as club ladder races go, at about 18 kilometers, but there is almost 170 meters of climbing, so I think this is a bit of a definition of a rolling course, because there are no big climbs, but it's constantly up and down. For example, we're going to go over the Clyde Kicker twice, we go over the Corkscrew and the Breakaway Bray once, and then there's a drag for a couple kilometers up towards the finish. So yeah, that should be a good one. At 4 watts per kilo, it's estimated that it'll take about 27 minutes. And I think that's a reasonable estimate of what we're gonna be facing today. Whew. So let's not beat around the bush here. Let's get straight into the action.
Let's race.
So, given the makeup of the opposition team, our strategy today was, if possible, to see if we could drop one or two of their sprinters, Adam and Sam, before the finish. We knew dropping Rickard or Örjan would be much harder, but then we thought we would have a good chance against them in a sprint. So I stupidly volunteered to push the pace at certain points of the race to see what damage I could do. And if nothing else, we were hoping it would hurt the legs of Adam and Sam a bit to help us in the sprint, if they were still there in the end. But, as it turns out, we actually dropped one of their sprinters really early. After just a minute and a half of the race, we noticed Sam on the other team is slowly dropping behind. And the gap keeps growing. And we realized that he must have had a dropout or a connection issue. So we knock off the pace to see if he's able to come back on. In fact, we had planned to do a team push on the Clyde Kicker, which comes just a couple minutes into the race. But we kept the pace low there as well to give Sam a chance. However, when we reached the top of the Clyde Kicker, he was almost 2 minutes behind and still not putting out any power. And at that point we said it would be too late for him to catch up, no matter what really. So in a way, that is actually when the race really started. That was a real shame for Sam and the race in general. I didn't want to sprint against him because he's a very strong sprinter, but him having a dropout was not how we'd planned to try and drop him. I can assure you of that. We've skipped forward slightly here, and we are about to attack for the first time. Niklas on our team attacks to string the group out, and the plan was, when the other team has chased back onto Niklas's wheel, that I would go to the front and continue to push the pace. Niklas pushes for a good 30 seconds before coming off the power, and then I go to work. I push around 6 watts per kilo or so for another 30 to 45 seconds before I can see Richard catching up to me, and I then come off the gas. Unfortunately, one of our riders, Niklas Rawe, had lost contact with the group a little during this effort, and the other team must have noticed since they kept pushing the pace to make sure that Niklas wouldn't get back on. So this first attack backfired on us. Well played to the other team. I rested a bit on the descent towards the corkscrew after that first effort. But then I was pushing the pace again towards the end of the corkscrew to keep, hopefully, putting some hurt into the legs of the opposition. I didn't get much of a gap here, but I kept pushing for a bit to make sure that the other team would have to expend some energy to cover. And I then rested a little and also used a draft boost as we go towards the breakaway brae, where I had planned on upping the pace again. And after a little bit of the climb, I go to the front, and then I push reasonably hard up the rest of the climb. Nothing nuclear here, but I was still doing 6 or 7 watts per kilo for a good portion of the breakaway brae to see if we could cause some separation from Mr. Netto in particular. However, the other team covers well again, and we're still all together as we get to the top of the breakaway brae. Another short skip forward. I had rested a bit since nobody else had pushed the pace since the last effort, but I wanted to have another go at it. So, on the small incline going into town and towards the Clyde kicker, I pushed the pace again. I know there's a lot of draft here, so it is hard to break away, but again, I wanted to at least make it a bit harder on the other team, to then have another dig up the Clyde kicker. I pushed for a good 45 seconds here, and again, the group is slowly stringing out, but I then come off the power as one of my teammates is losing contact slightly. So I then rest for the next 30 seconds or so before we get to the Clyde kicker, where I push the pace again going up the steeper parts of the climb. Still, I don't get much of a separation here, and I do come off the power after the Clyde kicker. So the question is whether all of these attacks I did worked, or whether I just tired myself out. Let's see. We are now approaching the end of the race. After my last attack, the pace had dropped significantly. I needed some rest, that's for sure, and I was just hoping it was the same for the others. I did think about going long towards the end, as I still had some left in the tank. But again, there's a lot of draft as the drag is not that steep, and I thought it would be really difficult to get away, especially since none of my other attacks had worked out that well. So I waited for the sprint, and it seemed that everybody else had the same idea. I must say, this was a bit of a weird sprint. I thought Örjan and Rickard would perhaps go long, as that would probably be their best chance, and I was ready for that. But nobody made any moves at all. And as we passed 300 meters to go, the pace had not even upped yet. But I told myself not to blink first. I hit my draft power up, and then I see Mr. Netto go with just under 200 meters to go, and I immediately jump on his wheel and go full gas. I get up to speed pretty quick, and I push over 1100 watts here for some 5 to 6 seconds, and that is enough to cross the line first. I think if the sprint was another 50 meters or so, Mr. Netto probably would have gotten me, but for once, I actually timed my sprint pretty well. Okay, a quick look at the final results. So, as just mentioned, I finished first, just ahead of Mr. Netto, with my teammate Jan in third place. If we look at the watts per kilo figures, we can see that Mr. Netto actually had slightly higher numbers than me. But I think my timing was a little bit better, and that is what I believe made the difference in the end. In fact, this was my best ever 15-second power, and since I only fully sprinted for just over 10 seconds, I think I can get it a bit higher than that. But either way, I'm really happy with that finish. But the most important thing was that the team won against strong opposition. Again, it is too bad that Sam had a dropout so early in the race, but we will have to have a rematch for sure with this team. As usual, a few post-race thoughts, and then we will wrap up this race vlog. All right, post-race thoughts. Good race, really enjoyed it. However, it's a real shame about Sam on the other team, who had a dropout or something after literally about a minute into the race. So the rest of us on both teams soft pedaled for a good couple minutes to see if he would get back on. But unfortunately that didn't happen until like 7-8 minutes or something. And by then obviously we're long gone. So a real shame about that. Would have liked to gone up against Sam. Anyway, so for the rest of us in the race, the plan for us was for me to push the pace a couple times on some of the hills. Not necessarily to drop anybody or go long for home, but rather I wanted to hurt the legs on the other team, especially their sprinter, Mr. Petto, who, at least on paper, is a very, very strong sprinter. So that's what I did. The group did string out 3 or 4 times, and while I could have kept going, I think, I wanted to save something for the sprint as well. So in the end, it was all of us down to a sprint finish. And for once, I did not blink first. It was Mr. Petto who led us out with literally like 150 meters left. I got on his wheel, and then funny thing about my sprint is that like my 5-second power is pretty good. It's just my 10 or especially 15-second power, it drops off a cliff. So in a really, really short sprint, I can push quite a few watts over 5 or 6 seconds or so. And since I had his draft or his wheel, I got past him, and then literally we're over the line. So yeah, hooray for me. If the sprint would have been another 5 or 10 seconds, I'm pretty certain he would have beaten me, and maybe some of the other guys as well. But I'll take the win. More importantly, we'll take the team win. Finished first, third and fourth, and then we had Niklas in 7th, I think. So pretty comprehensive win for us. But again, real shame about Sam on the other team. So rematch, Sam, is on the cards for sure. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. This is Sam trying to spin to win on Swift, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one. Bye-bye.